Well, you know,
Okay, if we could.
excited.
Okay, here we go, everybody.
Recording in progress.
Okay, I would like to call the Addison Central School District meeting to order. Today's date is August 14th, and the current time is approximately 6:30 p.m. If you'll notice, a couple changes to the agenda structure from the previous meetings have been made. First, for policy 821, public comments are encouraged and welcome at each regular board meeting now during two periods, one of which is for agenda items, and then the second period will be for any topic that the citizen so wishes to speak on. Second, the executive committee decided to eliminate the other agenda item and request that if you have specific topics that you would like to see on the agenda in the future, that you please submit them to the executive committee approximately a week before the board meeting so that we can take those into account when we meet. And next is time for introductions. And Joanne? No? We'll start with you.
Joanna Doria.
Steve Orzak.
Trisha Allen.
Suzanne Buck.
Brian Bauer.
Mary Heather Noble.
Lindsay Hesketh.
Barbara Wilson.
Tim Williams. Will Hatch, Technology Director.
And then let's go to Ellie.
Ellie Rump.
Nicole Carter, Assistant Superintendent, Equity and Student Services.
Courtney Braun, Director of Teaching and Learning. Emma Wilstein, Director of Communications.
Emma Mulvaney, Senior Consultant with the Strategic Planning Process.
Kelly Langer, Lead School Nurse.
Caitlin Steele, MUHS Principal.
Heather Crowley, Executive Assistant.
Matt Carenti, Director of Finance and Operations.
Excellent. Welcome, everyone. And do we have anyone in attendees?
Not at the moment.
Okay, thank you. So this is the time on the agenda where the public would be invited to comment on the agenda items. Looking in the audience, is there anyone here that would like to make a comment on any of the agenda items? And since there's no attendees other than Allie, then there's no public comment, so we just need 10 minutes up on the agenda. Oh, Jamie just came in. Excellent. But there's still no public. You're gonna move him over. Excellent. So, moving right along, it's time to approve minutes. We have 3 sets of minutes to be approved. And the first set of minutes is for the 6/26 board meeting. I would like a motion to approve the minutes for June 26th.
Make the motion to approve this.
A second?
A second.
Thank you. Discussion. Any discussion on the minutes? Corrections, changes? Hearing none, then let's vote on approving the minutes. Those all in favor of approving the June 26th minutes, say so by indicating aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
One. Me as well.
Okay, 2? Okay, both Steve and Brian. Thank you. Moving on, could I have a motion to approve the July 17th meeting minutes?
So moved.
A second.
Second.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. And Steve, any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the July 17th meeting minutes indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, we have Lindsay and Tricia. And Ellie, sorry. I have a hard time looking up there too. Sorry about that.
Did Jamie vote?
Yeah, he did. Okay, next. Moving on to July 18th. Could I have a motion for the July 18th retreat minutes?
Motion to.
Joanna, a second?
Second.
Steve? Any discussion? Okay, so all those in favor of approving the July 18th meeting minutes, or retreat minutes, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have Lindsay, Ellie, and that's it. Excellent. Thank you. Next, moving right along. Approving the ACSD bills. I'm going to turn it over to Steve at this moment.
Yeah, normally Chip does this, but Chip is in Alaska. Jason read the bills remotely. He is not in attendance either, so falls to me. I'll try to do as well as Chip does. There were 3 sets of bills to approve. One set from the 714, the general fund, which was mostly VI expenses, $746,086.51. And then there were payroll warrants for a total of $624,278.91. Another set of bills on the 28th. From the general fund, $766,329.87. And payroll warrants were $6,352.23. And today, Jason and I read the bills for 814. In the general fund, $1,683,000, or $1,683,641.34. Payroll warrant for a total of $588,242.03.
Thank you.
Mary Heather, do you want to?
No, I got it.
Oh,
Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the bills?
I'll move to approve the bills as read.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Thank you, Mary Heather. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, hearing none. All those in favor of approving the bills as read, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, Ellie, is it, what, was that an aye? It was a delayed aye. Okay, great. And any abstentions? Seeing none?
I was not opposed.
Yeah, no, and I'm so glad, yes. We caught that, thank you. Okay, the bills are approved. Thank you so much, Steve. Next, we're moving on. We're really moving quite quickly. Report of the superintendent. And under this item, we're going to be receiving a presentation on the strategic plan for equity. As a reminder, we've allocated 30 minutes for the presentation and then 10 minutes for Q&A. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Williams.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight, I think we'll be starting off with Emily, is that
I
correct?
think Emma's gonna
Emma's going
take
to?
it. Yeah, I'll be here.
Emma's our consultant on this project. This is a 2.5 years in the making. Is that correct? And this is a culmination of all that work. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. And so we have some slides just to help guide the conversation today, and I appreciate you pulling this up for us. Just again, for your record, I'm Mulvaney Stanek. I've been a consultant working for a little over 2 years or so with the district in a few different iterations to help design and then advance their strategic planning process, sort of moving through various ways of engaging your school community. And I'm joined tonight with one of our co-chairs of the action team, since this is sort of the end of the action team phase of work, handing it back to the board for review. And our other co-chair, Camila Blanco, who is a student, was unable to join us. She's preparing for college and will be leaving any day now. Samantha has been our great adult co-chair. We've done an intentional youth adult leadership model like we did for the advisory committee, and we'll kind of go over that a with it. I also want to acknowledge we have Kelly, who serves on our action team behind us, and many other folks. I mean, this summer, we invited the whole team to be here. You might see some more folks, assuming that you all discuss this a little bit more next meeting. Hope that more folks might be able to come from that robust team that we pulled together. So before we go into the slides, and that's fine, leave it on there. That's fine. Oh, you're directing. Oh, okay. Okay. I was gonna be all late to go. Okay, yeah. Anticipating, it's okay. Just a couple other just brief starting remarks. We have, and maybe hold it up for me. We have what we sent out to you on Friday. Hopefully everyone saw this. This, I want to emphasize, is super draft, but Emily has been working to make it so beautiful, the content that we have, truly, that we have been generating over the course of these 2 years. Really want to note there's a few pieces that are still not even in there. The advisory committee chunk of work, that was really significant to start this process. That will be in there soon, as well as obviously what the board does in terms of reviewing the recommendations from the action team and any edits and modifications you might be wanting to do over the course of your next piece of work. And then finally, obviously, any other small edits, typos, that kind of stuff to make a final.
Question at this point?
Oh, yeah, sure.
In reviewing the document, what I missed, and maybe in here somewhere, how do we get started? It's not here. The information, I think, is necessary to show that all this work and all this time and all this money is worth something. It just isn't in the document.
I appreciate that, Brian. There is a webpage that has everything documented that I'm sure Emily can share with the board, and includes all the prior reports, that include all of the origin story, if you will, that you're asking for. And as I mentioned, we'll make sure that's part of an introduction. I mean, it's kind of like the balancing, making sure we don't make an overly weighted document that's not usable, but also do right by documenting where we started and where we've been. So we appreciate that.
People who are going to be reading this, I think, would like to know. How did it happen?
And so just for the protocol, if folks could have me call on them, that would be awesome during the presentation. And I'd like to really give them time to present, and then maybe hold our comments and questions to the end. And if we need more than 10 minutes, we can decide if we want to allow for more than 10 because we already have a school schedule.
Okay, you have a chair. Okay, great. So the other piece, as we get going, is that we are now at the process, and this is the great slide. We're at the final phase of work, phase 4. This hopefully slide looks familiar because we presented it in May when we were last year giving you an almost final report from the action team, who was just finalizing their recommendations. And so the only thing I've modified on this slide is just the language to be past tense, because the action team did draft strategies and action steps that we're going to review at a high level today with you. For then the board, all of you, to discuss and approve. So that's where we are in the work. You'll see the prior 3 phases that we've done before. And then once approved, the plan will go to staff to work on advancing the goals over the next 5 years. That's the proposed timeline in here, and to deepen the district's equity work as sort of stated by these goals and these strategies and these actions that we recommended from your action team group. So, the next slide. So just a little reminder about kind of where we've been in the 2+ years. You've had a very intentional and deep involvement of the school community. You've had 2 different advisory bodies, essentially. That first group, which was the advisory committee, that was what we titled it, was a very, and I want to emphasize, this was probably a first time for the Addison Central School District to so intentionally involve folks who don't normally have a seat at the table, to come, be engaged, and really purposely have a little bit of say, really an advisory capacity, of course, but a say in where they want the future of the district. And most importantly, giving voice to their lived experience in the district. We involve students, we involve families and caregivers, we involve staff, people who aren't historically been at the table or come even to school board meetings to provide comment in your public comment period. And this was incredibly important because I think you would have a very different work product from both the advisory committee and the action team if you didn't have that intentional design. And Joanne, I'm not ignoring you, but I see you over there, so I'm patiently trying to look over that way. So just a few metrics, or just if I had more graphic design skills, I'd make it more of an infographic. But the advisory committee had 12 members on it, 3 students, 4 parents or caregivers, 3 staff and 2 community members at large. We're trying to really widen that conversation about the larger community, a principal and a central office staff person. They met 7 times in terms of gathering all together and a couple times in subgroups based on specific topic areas we started to explore. This group, as well as the action team, as I mentioned before, had an intentional co-design of leadership between both student and parent, or adult, I should say. The action team was the group that just recently wrapped up its work. It had 15 members, a little bit larger to account for more student voice. We have 4 students on this body, 3 parents and caregivers, 3 staff, a principal, and we also intentionally included more central office staff. And that was purposeful because that entity or that group of your staff and professionals will be taking what the board ultimately approves and starting to implement the details, the professional details that is really, in terms of board governance, you leave it to your staff to really implement the plan that the board approves in terms of goals and direction. They met, I'm repeating myself, probably 12 times, and that was with an additional meeting because we really want to make sure they finish off their work for you towards the end of June. Finally, all of you, or not all of you, some of you were here last fall, and the board put significant time into this process as well last August, September, October. For those who might remember, you spent your entire retreat last summer doing this. So we spent 5 hours together in that meeting, another 2 board meetings with at least an hour, if not more, to discuss setting mission, vision, goals, theory of action, and also an equity definition, which became a really vital framework for which the action team then really thought deeply about how to offer strategies and action steps that were through that lens of really advancing equity for the district. You also had 2 additional meetings, a small working group who worked out some details in between board meetings because you have a lot else to do in your meetings, and it seemed like the best and prudent work to work through some questions in between. Finally, school community, again, intentionally try to bring people to the table, seek their feedback. There are 6 different meetings of different formats of engaging parents and caregivers and the wider community. The board actually led a couple of those meetings intentionally. We did some surveys. I don't always love surveys, but there was the Hanover group survey, which was a professionalized survey offered up. They did a deeper analysis of more data points that were used, as well as more open-ended survey led by the advisory committee to just, again, seek feedback as many times as possible. The co-chairs also provided regular updates from both bodies to the school community so that we did our best to let people know in real time how we were proceeding. And finally, students. The students also received surveys. We did some intentional meetings with some student groups the best we could, so we don't rely only on our student members to be kind of the speaking for all students kind of dynamic. We didn't want that. I included in the parentheses, as the action team got close to finishing its work, they purposely put out sort of the draft strategy ideas that we'll see in this document to sort of do this task to say, students, are we missing something here, or is this in the right direction? And resoundingly, the students came back and said, this is indeed what we want you to focus on. And so we had high participation. Actually, I knocked my socks off. The middle school participation rate, I should have wrote this down, was higher than I've ever seen in a response rate. It's like in the 40s or something %, which is really high. And high school was somewhere in the 30s or so. Again, high participation. We gave them about a week, and it was really appreciated, students, if you're watching. And then finally, staff. We've also engaged staff through faculty meetings, a couple surveys to them as well. So that's not such an exciting infographic, but that's what you get from a non-graphic designer. All right. And just briefly, reminder of who your advisory committee was. Hopefully these names are familiar to you. Your co-chairs from the advisory committee are there to the right, Amanda and Esther. Again, a balance of staff and students and parents and caregivers here. And then the action team. You see pictures of them in action here. And then the action team is the next slide.
This shows how far back it went.
Oh, I know, right?
We all hit this.
Yes, that's how we all met each other for several meetings, was
What's your point?
masking it. It's still a responsible thing to do when needed. And then the action team, where we got much more into, you'll see them using that, I talked last time in May about an equity rubric mapping tool. That's them in action using, I love those white rolling boards in your high school library, by the way. I need one of those. Anyway, this is your action team. Again, a similar intentional design of who was at the table, and your great co-chairs, Samantha, who joins me here today, and Camilla, who was not able to join us. All right. So this is impossible to read, I realize, so you'll have a copy of these slides, but this is for board members who were here last spring, April of 2022. This was the first time we made this graphic to help define, this is an easier one to read in a second here, roles and responsibilities and the difference between, at that time, the advisory committee, the board, and the staff, just to really help people know who's on first, what's the work product expected for folks, what's your responsibility, what's your role. This provided actually quite helpful for folks who are still feeling a little mushy on what is this process since we're doing it in a different way and involving more school community. And I just brought that back up. It lives on the website as well, just to help folks understand that role. And then the next slide will just be specific to you all, the board. So you'll see here the role of the board, much in line with your policy governance structure, is that your role is to have oversight in the creation of it's really 2023 now, the strategic plan goals and theory of action. And those of you here last fall, and you'll see this in all the documentation from last fall, theory of action with your superintendent at the time last year was a logic theory tool, which would be about, we have these assumptions about if we do X, then Y will happen. So we do this to benefit students, Y will happen, maybe they'll have greater success, graduation rates, whatever that might be. We did a series of those. So at the time, and the action team is the next and final step of this, taking recommendations from your advisory groups or your advisory committee, and now your action team, and distilling those recommendations into priorities. And for those here last time, the advisory committee report you did take, and you really took elements of it, but you didn't take it verbatim. You made some tweaks and adjustments to make sure it aligned with where the board really felt the goals needed to be set for the district. Also, during that work, mostly in the retreat, we reviewed and dusted off and updated your mission and vision statement and your value statement and the equity definition I mentioned before. And that's not insignificant because that is really important to do, or at least to review when you're doing a strategic plan to make sure that the language works. And when we reviewed it with that equity framework, there were some pieces, even language-wise, that didn't feel like it matched so much of where you wanted to go. And language matters, as well as who can be seen and reflected back in those powerful and important statements and who's not reflected back. So those were updated. And so your work product at the time was to create that mission vision statement, the goals, and then you handed it off to the action team who's now back to give you the final product. And hopefully between today, your next meeting, and then perhaps just into September, we will do some further deliberation together, make final changes if there's any needed, and then we'll have a final document to approve so that your staff can then officially implement and set details in flight. All right, so just a reminder, these are the goals that we set last fall that have not changed. These were the goals that the action team were given. They fall under 3 categories. The only thing we changed, we're just given a title, and maybe Nicole can remind me, that these are frameworks that belonging, access, and success are sort of guiding a framework that the district staff have been using for a while. You also, Caitlin, yes, is that fair enough to say? And they really did tie well with the 3 goals that the board set. And so belonging is really around well-being and community and culture and people's sense of belonging here. Access is around allocation of resources, thinking of the district as a whole, making sure that all students and families have access so they can have successful outcomes. And the success, of course, is as a refresher, is around the learning environment. Obviously, it's a school district, you have to have that in there somewhere. But very intentionally try and make sure we have success for all students despite identities and abilities, and really setting up your graduates, who are folks who go through your system, to make positive contributions to the community. And that aligns again back with your mission and vision. So those are the 3 goals set. And then just briefly, want to remind folks, because if you're going to say you're doing a strategic plan based on equity, it's important to keep bringing that back in so everyone's clear about what that means. If you deviate and don't bring that up, I've seen this with many groups, that you start defining it back on your own individual definition. And so I want to remind you 2 things. This definition between this slide and the next slide was worked on by the board in the fall and adopted as a kind of a working definition of what you meant for this strategic plan. And I'm happy to read this, but I'll pause and let you read it on your own. And then I'll just remind you, you have a adopted policy, it's C29, I believe. C29 that was adopted back in 2020, which is a much more in-depth policy that the board in 2020 has adopted, and we did look at last year as well. So I'm going to pause for a second, just that maybe it's been a minute since you've seen this, and let you all read. unless Madam Chair, it's helpful for me to read for any accessibility reasons.
I think we're okay with
Okay. It's not an item. Is that me to read? Okay.
It's also in the document.
It is a document. This was my secret to rest my voice for a second because I lost my voice last week. You should have heard it last week. So if it's in the document, we can go to the next slide and this is wrapping up a full definition and then just again reminding you in your policy documents to have a much larger one. All right. And I promise Samantha's going to say something in a minute. Samantha was in our small group on the third goal, so I'm going to have her speak to that one. So we're now into the strategy recommendations. So well, this is our kind of big overview. So what I'm going to do is walk you through the goal and then the strategies that accompany it. And I'm not going to get into the details of action steps. That's what I'm hoping we'll get into in more detail at the next meeting, because otherwise we would be here for, I could not possibly do that in the amount of time allocated. So we're not ignoring them. I have a couple of examples as illustrations, but that's sort of what we have in design. So under belonging, the first, these are, and I want to remind you, your action team went through probably dozens of strategy ideas that were generated from hearing from many stakeholders over the course of the spring, and looking at the surveys, looking at the work the advisory committee did, and then using that rubric tool to really figure out what strategies from their best take on things that have the biggest impact. Because you can't do everything. You could have, 55 strategies under every goal, and it would be a very unworkable strategic plan. You could not possibly advance that in any effective way, and you certainly couldn't really measure much success on that. So we really tried to be disciplined in saying these are our 3 most impactful strategies. We can try to kind of time limit it or number limit it as much as possible. So in order to achieve this goal of belonging here stated, the action team at least recommends to you, strategy 1 would build a system for universal well-being, positive culture, and a sense of belonging based on evidence-based practices and that support youth. And then within that, there are 4 action steps, and one, just to illustrate that a little bit, would be to proactively center restorative practices when there's conflict in the school system, students, staff, etc., and to just more intentionally bring that in. And that, for example, would be an action step that would help advance that strategy and ultimately achieve that goal, as an example. Strategy 2 would be to elevate and prioritize students' mental health. This one was off the charts, supported by students in their response about, whether these strategies are in the right direction. There are 5 action steps within that. One, just quick illustration, is to start early in pre-K with age-appropriate mental health support, and just acknowledging it's not something to just suddenly pay attention to in high school. To have a real sense of well-being and belonging for students, this must start earlier. And then finally, strategy 3 puts students who traditionally and historically experience marginalization first when engaging in decision-making and planning. And so by this, there's a great action step that folks started to grapple with around using an equity rubric when making major decisions on a district level or certainly on a school-wide level. And what that would do is start to intentionally place people who've been pushed to the margins by systems like racism and homophobia, et cetera, more intentionally in line when decisions are being made, and not as an afterthought or doing a repair after harm was done or something, but more in the front line and using tools that exist out there, and one that hopefully works for this district, that creates a kind of an equity-based rubric when making decisions so that folks are considered at the beginning rather than at the end of the process. Okay. Goal 2, and then Samantha. I trust this in here. Yeah, I'll for next time. So goal 2 is around access, and again, this is allocation of resources in a more district level, making sure things are equitably and sustainably spread throughout the district in fiscally responsible ways. Strategy 1 recommended is to create a data-informed, equity-based resource allocation system. Now, this one, I gave them a little bit more leeway. There's technically 2 action steps, but there's 12 sub-steps we saw within there. So this is really the nuts and bolts big goal. So there's a lot of systems and interworkings here to think about. But one interesting, within those 2 action steps in order to achieve or move strategy 1 would be around looking at your staffing models and how you bring staff into the district, as well as fiscal management, including the idea of an equity-informed budgeting process. Now, I flagged that one in particular because most of what's recommended in this series of strategies and action steps involve largely staff, because it's around classrooms, it's around student behavior, it's around culture in classrooms. The board, of course, with policy governance, that's not your role. However, there are a couple pieces in here that would be your role. Obviously, budgeting, for example. So when we have more time to deliberate, I encourage us to go through and specifically, because that's your expertise, figure out, is that a good fit for this district? It is being started in other districts in Vermont, and this would be a place certainly that the board's expertise is really needed. And then finally, strategy 2, collect, analyze, and report on resource allocation data. And there's 6 steps below that, really with an emphasis of using data to inform in your reporting in a helpful way that can inform better decisions, as well as an assessment of your progress to make sure you're actually moving towards these goals and advancing this mission and vision and getting somewhere near there as you work this plan. You ready for goal 3?
Sure.
Okay. I'm here for that.
Around goal 3, success, our first strategy was to identify and address systemic barriers that affect student success in every classroom due to, but not limited to, primary language spoken, socioeconomic status, disability status, or marginalized identities. I think one of the important action steps here is to leverage staff knowledge and skill to support general education teachers to adapt and strengthen lesson plans and investigate inconsistencies in classrooms. I think using knowledge from teachers who work in special ed, for instance, to help make a curriculum plan that includes kids of different abilities is going to make a huge difference. Strategy 2, build capacity for culturally responsive practices by bringing in voices to help diversify the curriculum, facilitate difficult but courageous conversations, and put diverse resources into the community. Offer role-appropriate professional development for teachers, staff, and administrators that creates a responsive and inclusive environment, and add more family education and provide them resources about diversity and culturally responsive communities. I think it's important to remember that it's not just the staff that we can help support, it's the families too, in creating a more culturally responsive community. And strategy 3, provide multiple pathways for students that are equally dynamic and celebrated to assure student success. I think better utilizing the Career Center and introducing those other pathways that aren't typical, and learning how to celebrate those as a whole community, the same way we do with a typical graduation or a typical plan after school is important.
So to wrap up, so we can have some time for questions. So the next steps at this point are for the board. This is our first piece of giving you kind of a high-level view of what the action team's recommendations are, to then help you with that deliberative process so you can decide what pieces make sense. The goals, we didn't change the goals, so unless you want to go back from last fall, the goals are the framework really here, but really honing in on the strategies and those proposed action steps to make sure this makes sense for final approval by the board. And so once that's done over the course of either the next school board meeting and then into September, I want to remind you that last year the board decided that in order to get some of that work done based on questions raised, there was a little subgroup formed between some meetings to just help advance the work. That may or may not be useful this time. The work is much more sort of developed at this point than last time, but it's your call to do. I just remind you of that structure option. And I'm here to help with those facilitated conversations throughout to get you to the approval process, and then I exit the stage by for left or up or down or whatever. And then at that point, the board hands off to, I mentioned this in the front end of the presentation, to your professional staff to really work on the implementation. That includes timeline, sequencing. You can't do all of a 5-year plan in year 1, right? That's impossible. And so you would use the professional expertise of your staff to be able to start implementing and engaging relevant stakeholders and partnerships that you already have to help advance this. A year ago, we talked a lot about how a district can't accomplish everything. Like you can't magically solve all students' mental health needs, right? So part of this is really making sure you're leveraging not only your professional staff, but partnerships that the district has in a way to advance this. That is not the job of the board, it is the job of your professional staff that you have in those partnerships. And included in that, we talked last year as well, starting to really develop how will benchmarks and assessments take place, when will report back to the board happen, on a 6-month basis, on an annual basis, what that will all look like, with the goal of next spring, because, realistically, get everything up and running. You also have a superintendent search to go through. Ideally, in the spring, you'll have some level of assessment in that first year, acknowledging these external factors, right? That's a reality. A year ago, we didn't necessarily know you'd have a big search, and so your new leader in a year will also be a factor here. So your staff will need to pace that first year to make sure that things are aligning in a way that makes sense. So with that, unless there's anything you want to add, someone?
Question?
Just 1 second.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much for giving us an update, and also thank the team for all the amount of work that went into this. And it's obvious that there's a lot of work that went into this. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, before I opened it up to questions.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the whole team, and the advisory committee, we appreciate that. And your staff as well. Your staff is right at the table.
Absolutely. Okay, so now I'll open it up to questions, and I guess Brian and then Steve.
Yes, I have one question. What you have is a very complicated situation called a strategy. This board is going to have to evaluate whether the strategy is working or not. If you could, how would you propose our board to do that? The board is not going to wait for 5 years, or 4 years, or 3 years. I think the board would like to see something on a yearly basis to show progression. What are your thoughts?
Well, I totally agree, and that's why I mentioned on the last slide here, the first report and evaluation of how things are going to happen in the spring of 2024. So right as the school year is wrapping up. I think you have a couple other pieces that are factors, the hiring of a new superintendent, and I'm not sure what your other alignments as a district are, how you evaluate other pieces, but certainly superintendents usually engage with strategic plans, so they might have additional ideas. But for me, I'm not going to be part here of this process. I would recommend that you take pieces you learned from this design process where you intentionally ask school community, you engage feedback from not just your board and your staff, but your actual students and your parents and caregivers, and utilize some of those tools that we use. So there were surveys and stakeholder meetings, et cetera, just to make sure, not in a heavy-handed way, but in a meaningful way that you're really seeking 360 is overused, but anyway, 360.
Because the board is going to need a baseline, a starting point, so that after a year goes by, it can refer to that baseline and say, okay, here's the data. It either proves itself out or it doesn't, and needs to be modified.
Yeah, and Brian, there's a lot of great documentation from those surveys, the Hanover group in particular, which I'm happy to share directly with you, that gives you all that great baseline, and I think there's some really helpful data in there. Some of it's unfortunately a little data because of COVID. The state, for example, didn't run the youth behavior, I always get that wrong, youth behavior risk survey, but it's there, and absolutely those should be parts of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, thank you.
Steve.
One minor comment on goal 1, strategy 1, action step 1. You have the abbreviation or the acronym for JEDI, which says justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It should be justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. So it doesn't actually make JEDI if you have it the way you have it blown up there.
You definitely want the appropriate JEDI.
Yeah,
so
I
yes,
kind
that's
of
thanks
think
for
it's
catching
my
that.
one.
Yep,
So that's just a minor one.
got it.
The second thing was I applaud your recommendation that you have a nurse in every school. Was there any conversation about having a counselor because mental health is not really the domain of a medical nurse, whereas having a counselor or a psychologist or someone, a mental health professional in every school would seem to be a logical recommendation based on the goal that was set there. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. Sam or Kelly, do you want to speak about the stakeholder?
I would love to hear Kelly speak on that.
Yeah, I mean, I
Sure.
can certainly speak to the nursing one, and I think we feel that the mental health support is equally as important. And I know part of the strategies and action steps weigh very heavily on supporting mental health for students. And part of that, it may not be specifically noted, but part of that is recruiting staff to support the mental health of students and also implementing ways to retain those staff. I think one of our action steps is also looking at, just kind of the nuts and bolts of retaining staff, like paying people appropriate wages to keep them in those positions and things like that. So it's definitely a priority in this plan.
But what you're saying is that it would be almost impossible to have a school psychologist in every school because we just don't have 7 school psychologists that we can recruit.
Yeah, I don't know if it would be impossible. I mean, it would certainly be a matter of looking at what budgets can support and the needs of the schools, and but there certainly needs to be more support than there is now. I think we also spoke to the value nurses have towards mental health. While they may not be professional psychiatrists, I think school nurses hold a lot of power and value in improving a student's mental health, and being available in a capacity, in any capacity, in every school would be valuable.
The only other thing I would just add is, again, a year ago, we talked about the vital importance of partnerships and your mental health larger community here, knowing that, again, a school can't solve every single thing, but what the charge here is, and to Kelly's point, when you think about equitable staffing models that are within budget and within the, investment priorities that the board sets, you make that decision ultimately of what combination to ultimately meet the goal of student well-being. Mary Hubbard.
One of the things, first of all, thank you for this work and just the real sort of three-dimensional thinking around it with the team, and looking at it for several different perspectives and acknowledging in particular sort of rubbing points between implementing like an equity-based rubric to make decisions and our budgetary constraints, right? And that is going to be something that this board is really going to be kind of gnawing on, especially this year. And one of the things that sort of struck me when I was looking through this, especially with respect to the second strategy, well, the strategy around allocation of resources, and particularly staffing models, the facilities master planning process that we went through, and you weren't necessarily involved in that, but this board and this community certainly was. And that did involve some strategic staffing planning that kind of prompted pretty varied responses throughout our community. And so it's a really tough conversation that we're going to be having to have as we move forward with this. I think that just needs to be acknowledged. So I'm wondering if, or how, some of the work that I think needs to be done around involving community in this and making sure that there's some element of consensus building, something around that, because I guess I sort of feel like a lot of our questions about facilities planning are driven not just by budget, but by equity. And we all know this is a really difficult challenge for our district, and that we know we're going to have some conflict around it. And I think our strategic plan would probably be beneficial to have some element of facilitated work around that, because that's the reality. I mean, we have some really, really difficult challenges ahead of us, and everybody has really important perspectives to bring. And in order for us to move forward as a district, some tough decisions are going to need to be made about staffing and what the equity rubric will look like. And I just am wondering if there's room in our strategies or our specific action items to accommodate some of that work that I think is going to be necessary. And I don't know how exactly that looks and to what degree it falls on the board versus the staff of both. I guess I just want to bring it up as I think it's a necessity for us to be thinking about as we move forward.
One piece, and I'm actually going to flip to the end notes here, because in the last meeting of the action team, I can't remember it's number 4 on end notes. End notes are important to read. Please read those. I originally had those for those and it didn't work visually, so end notes, because we actually got into a really productive, although we didn't have the time and it wasn't really charged and get into the details of an actual position on facilities or changes to school models or whatever that might be. But what came out of that conversation was, remember, this action team is really a little microcosm of your larger school community by purpose and design.
Yeah.
There are different opinions there, and we try to reflect that in the end note, but people really valued having a bit of a structured conversation about it. We didn't go there in full depth, but for those 20, 30 minutes of exploring it, there was some courageous conversation about saying a thing and saying how people thought. And there was a thought, that's because that team had spent 12 meetings building trust and building that relationship and knew people would hear them out and knew someone else could provide a counter viewpoint and not have it all be shut down. So I really appreciate that, Mary Heather, in particular, because I think two things, bringing that forward, whether the board wants to grapple with that and provide a little bit of a concrete recommendation to staff for implementing like a specific thing more than the team provided you for an action step, and remembering that where the board and staff have already partnered in convening community and exercise that muscle a little bit more as you go forward. Like continue to do that in some way, shape, or form, and in a reliable enough way where you can, as much as you can, build trust that the board is really trying to truly engage community and not just continue to, I'll use the word, avoid conflict, avoid the kind of trickiness of the conversation. Like try to embrace it because it is something that really, it's kind of like the big elephant in the room. Is that fair enough too? That was exactly okay. No, easy for me to say, but I do think that was a big observation I've had since working in this district. Yeah.
So can I just follow up if I may? And this is, now I'm kind of thinking about, our lanes, our roles. For the strategic plan document itself, how would we capture that so that the board has a sense of responsibility to do that trust building, to do that community work, to do that sort of partnered conversation around this big issue that we have, recognizing that the strategic plan eventually goes to staff and is implemented, by staff. How do we capture that?
Well, I think on this particular point, probably in a couple of ways, I would say that the board actually come up with an action step that is purposely placed into the plan before you finally approve it, that states it a little bit more firmly about what you want that movement in that direction to be. And maybe also within, maybe under goal 2 or so, which is kind of the most operational piece, or maybe it's just a statement in general, that you want this to direct the staff to continue to use the engagement methods that have been started to use during this process. That may or may not actually be an action step or maybe just approach, but I think having that as part of your final approval would give enough direction for staff to then move that forward. So that combination, I would say.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Joanna.
I want to echo everyone's gratitude for this document and putting it all together. I think it's the right length. It's very digestible. I can appreciate wanting to know more of the backstory and the origin story, but I think what's here is really useful, and I think that's the goal of this, right? I have a note here about I appreciated the plain language of the school consolidation tension, and reading that the advisory action team had conflicting opinions was, it's real. So it made me have more trust in this and more trust in the process. I also really appreciated the challenge of the zero-sum thinking when it comes to budgeting, because that's going to be very new for all of us. I think that's what we've been operating with, that's what the community's been operating with for a long time, because we've been going off historical budgets from schools. And I think there have been some steps into creating this one learning community, but really it's like historical budgeting layered with ESSER, and so I think it's going to be a really new territory for us to think about a budget that has maybe weights involved and not maybe per pupil. So I definitely appreciated that part of the end note. And I know we didn't really go into that much detail with the action, with the steps, but there are a couple of steps that have almost like examples, and then some of them don't. I would just love to see like more like IE, do you know what I mean? Like, for example, like when it comes to like families, you go in to consider family mentors, advocates, liaisons, parent advocacy groups. That was great, because then I could actually like envision that happening. But there are some things that are very vague. It's just like expand learning opportunities outside of school. for school? Is that or is that for the staff? Is that for the students? So I think if I could offer like a suggestion when we go into looking at those action steps to have more like, i.e., this is what we're thinking about. I also I had trouble with the idea with like the word data, because I've heard multiple times that like the district has so much data, and yet here we are saying we need to gather more data. Has a suggestion to disaggregate the data. Like, we knew that about the Hanover survey. Do we follow, like, do we take that and go with it, or do we start again? It just feels like we gotta be using what we've created and what we've paid for to like help move us along. So I just struggle with data and what that even means. And then just a question. So at this point, the board is gonna talk about or look more closely at the action steps and then approve this document?
Ideally, yes, but not necessarily all in the next meeting.
Okay.
Again, taking the time you need. This is a big 5-year document, but in September, I would say date certain, that would be ideal, because we also want to make sure that staff have enough time to get things up and running at the start of the school year.
And so after that, it's really in the range, like this implementation team has the reins.
Until they come back and report progress, back to Brian's point, which is ideally the first time they do that, the meeting delay would be in the spring. I would hope that your interim superintendent and then your future superintendent would have a more regular kind of snapshot as you go, but a formal, here's a full, report. And then also knowing exactly how you're going to report and assess that progress, so that it's a useful assessment for you and not, I don't know, it's just sort of another report to stick into the PDF files of, we don't have really bookcases anymore, but like on the PDF shelf or something, right?
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, that's part of the implementation team's task, is really make sure, well, how are you going to measure that progress?
Yeah. That's a good question.
Yeah.
And I do think bringing back to Brian's point, like having some sort of baseline, and that's like, okay, then what data, as our current data, like what are we using for our baseline? Is it just like anecdotal, like whatever we feel, so I think really clearly knowing what we're measuring the progress on. That's long.
Suzanne.
So, great work, lots of work here, and there's a lot of more documents on the website, I know. So the one thing that's kind of stood out to me that was interesting was, and it's one that I struggled with, on goal 2 of access, then go to physical management, 1C, where we've worked, we're talking about equity and meeting the student where they are, and then it says the students are not able to access the services they need in their elementary schools. Consider criteria-informed, equity-informed school placement at another school within the district. And I'm just wondering what might have been the thoughts behind that, because now if you take a student out of their home community and plunk them in another school where they don't know anyone, there's a lot of issues with that, not only just for them, but the family as well.
So there's a great end note on that as well, but I can't see what
Of course.
that I'll just direct you to. Three talks a little bit about that. I mean, again, we didn't have the time to go in great depth, but we wanted to flag at least there is a version of that happening now, and to just better understand what goes into that now. What is the criteria? What are the benefits or not? Because it's beneficial for some students, not for all, and different things should be weighted for what would go into the criteria and decision to place a child outside of that. We even talk, for example, it's not necessarily always about any need helping need an IEP or learning need. It could be that there's multiple households that support that child, and maybe going into another school that's closer to household A versus household B is very important for that child's well-being. So there's a lot of factors when we actually start to open up and explore, and then also being thoughtful of meeting the current student population need, like whatever the district's doing now, maybe further altering it. And there's a spectrum, right? So there's that small population to help meet their needs, and there's a much wider variation, and we weren't necessarily making a recommendation on any step of that. So, I don't know if you experience, I'm from Burlington, but like Burlington, for example, because we're a very different district, I'm not suggesting you do this, you can place your child in any elementary school in Burlington, and it's an open process, right? And depending on the size, and kids in that neighborhood get first dibs, but like, it's a very different model that works for that district. Is there something, as you explore it, that would work for this district that needs a little bit more of the need of your current student population and your family population? That's kind of what was going on last week.
Again, thank you. It's so nice to see this presented. And I look forward to the steps that are coming in the future. I have a number of comments, like short comments. Do you have a draft of the equity rubric?
No, we make a recommendation because we didn't have the capacity to go, review tools and whatnot, but that would be one of the things they would recommend the staff start to review. And again, and no, in there somewhere it talks about being really strategic though, not pulling any of them off the shelf, but one that really works for the demographics and the geography of your district with the size of your schools and the makeup of your district, so it works. You don't want to pull something off that just not match, apples and oranges.
And as far as staying in the lane, would the board be involved in together creating this because it's tied to budget? I don't know if we have the answer to that, but I would really like to see that. And I kind of think that would be something that would be beneficial to have some board involvement because it's tied to distribution of resources. And then on page 7, just a little thing, but the Career Center it's in lowercase, just Career Center, and I think that's a huge, valuable resource. So just to maybe have that spelled out, just with the, if there are other flexible pathways. I guess it's similar to what Joanna was talking about, that maybe name some of these flexible pathways, particularly if they have formal program names. Footnote number 3 stood out to me as well, or whatever you want to call it, EndNote. And just sharing, I wanted to share a very quick anecdote that I was equidistant from Mary Hogan, Salisbury, and Ripton. And it would have been nice to have a choice which school, and it wouldn't be factoring in special education or anything, but I didn't have a choice. And so that would just be one very small anecdotal, where they have such a small class in one of the schools and medium, and then, he's in 20 plus kids. So it's like, oh man, it'd be nice to have, and then in EndNote number 8, it recommends the district using a variety of tools. If there's any further information about what some of those, not an inclusive list, but some of the key tools that might be used. And then my final comment has to do with the timeline. At the beginning of March, when we have the town meeting and voting, there will be a turnover on the board. I would love to be able to be, I just think it's something we need to be very aware of in the timeline, that the group who's been working on this for a long time, the composition is going to be changing. So to have the first set of evaluation happening right after that transition, if there's any way to try to bring some of that in sooner so that the group who's been working on this has a little bit more time to digest that, and then that it's being handed off to a brand new board with people who might be totally new to the work. Just having that in mind would be really helpful, I think, for the transition. And then, yeah, but thank you, very well presented.
Lindsay, that's a great point on the timeline piece, because that's going to be an ongoing, the reality of your structure and your board. And also just, not to go all the way back, but I just want to also flag on your point around the equity rubric and equity budgeting and just board involvement. anything that rises to the level of perhaps creating a policy, that is your lane, right? So it might be the point where the staff starts to explore different equity rubrics for decision-making, district-wide, et cetera. District-wide decision-making, the board is very much involved in that, and it might rise to the level of developing a policy, which is your charge, right? When you have enough information to pick, yes, this is something we want to make permanent and a piece of policy so that it is hopefully consistently applied throughout the district and all the schools, so.
It takes a long time for policies.
Well, I
to
know,
be
it's why I'm
formed,
like
so
that. So this isn't
give
like.
the policy committee the information like now, and maybe
Right,
a year
got it.
from today, we'll have something.
Well, and again, I really emphasize, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of districts that are deeply in this work throughout Vermont, and to really tap your colleague, have your staff tap other places that are a little bit further ahead. So you could just really figure out what are the Vermont size approaches, what tools have they tried on. So you're not starting from zero, it's just really, working in community with this work is out there.
So I have a couple questions. So back when we were doing the work in the fall, I had asked a question about how do we know kind of that we've made progress, those measures of success. So from year to year. So when does that happen? So that we know we can look back in the evaluation phase and say, yep, we actually, achieved what we were hoping to achieve, or in some cases, maybe we didn't achieve what we wanted to and we want to address. And this is similar probably to Joanna and also what Brian had said. But when does a little bit more specific, I guess the word.
Specificity,
Thank you.
yeah.
Come into play.
Yeah.
So that when we are in the evaluation phase, we really have something concrete to evaluate against.
And that, not to kick the can down to the implementation team, but that's really where they start to look at, okay, so now that these are the action steps, these are the strategies, these are the goals, how do we measure success against that? And I would emphasize that we would use a lot in this process, both qualitative and quantitative data sources, because it's very important. It's going to be very limiting when you only rely on stuff that's a passive survey where not everyone participates. There's language barriers, there's time barriers, etc. So being really mindful that in whatever those metrics are set, that you're having multiple ways to give you that information about your progress. So that's where it would be, and going back to plain language, I would also make sure we don't evolve the recommendation, because I won't hear, but overly complicate it so both board and school community can understand what progress is and what it's supposed to look like. And then making that space too that, wow, this is much slower to make progress on this because we've learned a lot in 2 years and we now have to adjust, because that's the other part of that true evaluation and assessment is the board saying, wow, in 2 years we have not moved the needle, or we've really moved the needle. And how do we adjust things? Not necessarily the goals, but how do we adjust strategies, because we've just really not been able to make much of an impact. We've got to be honest about that. So in 5 years, we're not just saying, oh, didn't do it again.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely. And then a while ago, a community member stressed to me the use of the word Jedi. Is that really, in your opinion, a good representation for equity? And I did a Google on it, right? And even Scientific America had an article indicating that, no, this was it doesn't give you in your mind equity work, because this was an elite religious group, whatever. So I don't know if I know that folks are using that term and it's catchy and all that kind of thing, but I'm wondering if it's the right term to use.
And that's a question for y'all, and going back to the most important thing is use plain language.
Yeah.
So, everyone likes a catchy acronym in education, so we don't need to add to the edu-speak, the soup that's out there. So the point being, the J in there was an attempt to provide a little bit more of an active presence, because the other thing I will caution about is DEI work has often become, we've adopted the policy and that's it, especially white majority-led organizations and straight majority-led organizations, where it's we've done our best and we've checked the box, moved on. Having something in that, at least somewhere in your language that implies this is a verb, we're actively doing this, it's part of our assessment, is what's really behind the J of the Jedi. So how do you get there is,
it's really the acronym. It's not what the acronym is made up of.
Sure.
I embrace that fully.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So from a next step perspective for us, and we maybe spend I know we're over, but we were ahead, so I think we could spend a couple more minutes talking about what we need to do as a next step.
So, my suggestion, and I don't know what's on your next agenda, is that you have either a purposeful amount of time at the next meeting where you really come having read through the action steps again, you generate some good questions here, where we have some further dialogue, sort of mimicking a little bit of the structure last time, where we can identify if anything that needs further, either just straight wordsmithing or further exploration. And there's a lot of further exploration that you then maybe task a small working group. We've learned a little bit in that process that it would be well documented and known when it's meeting and what its work is, and it would come back to the board with some of that more detailed stuff, and like a board recommendation of how to do some of the more detailed stuff, if it's not just wordsmithing work. And that would be then for some point in your September, I'm not sure what Labor Day, how y'all work. That I think is probably the most efficient way forward, but if your next meeting either don't have a full hour to offer, or it's a lot more to go through, then we might need to space it out a little bit more. That's what I
So we can take that up from an executive committee perspective and talk about that, because we also have this superintendent search that.
that thing.
Yeah, that thing. Yeah, that we also need to kind of come up with a work plan around as well. Okay. Yes, Lindsay?
I have a specific question about that. At what stage would we decide whether that's done within a meeting or in an ad hoc committee?
I think I would give you all see where you are in about an hour of deliberation time at the next board meeting, and then make that decision. Because it may not be needed, I'm not pushing that at all, it may not be needed, but it may be needed for 2 or 3 really juicy things that you just need some people who are willing to put some more thinking time into it, to then come back with like a more thought out piece. It's just the challenge of having a lot on your agenda, that's all it is just to try to help move things forward.
Well, thank you so very much. Appreciate it.
Sorry, board members on Zoom, hopefully if you had any, and you have my email, or reach out to Emily if there's things that you would like to also put forward just in terms of planning for next. So I'll see you in 2 weeks. Awesome. Thank you. And hopefully with more action from you folks.
Thank you so much. And we'll get back to you, the executive committee, regarding kind of our timing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we're still ahead a little bit, but that was good work and important, I thought, to spend a little extra time on. Report of the board. The first item on there is action to approve policy C1, C15, D23, F3, and F4. Suzanne, I'm sorry. Do you want to make any statements before we start doing motions on those?
The board received all of these over a month ago.
Yep.
A month and a half ago. Some of these are mandated by the state. We're supposed to have them approved by August 1, but there's no policy in place on the state. At least not yet.
Not yet.
So, but yeah, so the ones that were supposed to be done a little earlier were F3 and F4, fire emergency preparedness drills, and F4, the access control and visitor management. But we've all seen these at least once. Some of them have been up twice probably. But they are here for final adoption.
Okay, so then let's step through each one. And starting with C1, can I have a motion to approve policy C1?
So,
Second. A second is Tricia. Any discussion on C1?
Yes,
Okay, Brian?
a couple of things. I think 45 days is too long a period for any individual to wait for records. I think it's acting as a deterrent instead of a facilitator. Secondly, I see no reason why a teacher's notes can be shared with a substitute and not with a parent. It makes no sense to me at all.
Mary Heather.
I guess just a follow-up question on that. For this policy, the 45 days, I assume, was what is presented by the SBA and the standard. Is there any sort of statutory basis in that? Do you know? You can't change it if it's in statute.
That I don't know. I think they probably have said, because they just want to give people time to be able to get in and see them. You know, it's not saying, it says within 45 days after the district receives a request for access. It doesn't say you have to wait 45 days. It says that from the time you write and say, I want to see it, you have a 45-day window.
Before you're out of compliance.
Right,
Yeah.
so, you know, because, you know, if somebody was put in a letter saying September, and then they forget that they were told they could see it, and then showed up in June, you know, people might wonder. So I think that's why it's just giving them a timeline.
Okay, Brian?
My thought on that is that it's based on the people who are holding the records and the time that they have to supply those records. That's the 45 days. I don't see any indication that it's dependent on somebody requesting within 45 days.
It says, the right to inspect and review the student's education records within 45 days after the day the district receives a request for access. So a request for access is a letter, a note, a phone call requesting to see the records.
And the district has 45 days maximum
Right.
to answer that. I guess, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mary Heather.
Sorry about that part. I guess I'm not sure how the rest of the board feels about this, but if we were going to contemplate changing it, I think we absolutely need to go statute first and determine whether or not that 45 days is based on statute. I know a lot of times, like, with special ed stuff,
Right.
it is based in state regulation or federal regulation and statute, so I'm not sure that we can't do that.
That's a good point, but let's do it.
I'm sorry, I didn't bring my state statute book with me.
Joanna, you?
I just want to say, I think it's in statute. Because I'm looking at the state's education data collection. And it's, I mean, I'm not reading the statute, but it's clearly here, not from VSBA, so.
And it does, footnote 1 does state VSC 123G 34 CFR, Part 99, so it is in the state statute.
Yeah,
Point.
that's my sense.
Just one second.
Right.
Tim?
Yeah, the reality is, we would not wait 45 days to provide records to people who ask for them. There's no way we would be that way. But in statute, it probably does give districts that amount of time. So we prefer to get the things to the people who request them in a timely manner, not wait. This doesn't mean we'd wait 45 days, doesn't mean we'd sit on it. It means we would take care of it as expeditiously as possible. I'm not gonna dilly around.
Go ahead, Brian.
Point of order.
Yeah,
If
okay.
there's a motion on the table
We're discussing.
that two people can, or a person can contribute 2 times, according to Robert's rules.
Okay.
Director
Since
Bauer
when did that
has,
stop you?
Director Bauer has now been recognized 3 times.
Okay.
Can we move on?
Sure. So, I mean, the only option at this point, if someone feels strongly changing it, you can make a motion to amend it, and then we'll vote on that motion as a board, and then decide to change or not, and move forward with the original motion. So that would be one option, Brian, that I would offer to you if you want to make a motion to modify that. If not, then I think we'll move on. Is that fair? Okay. Any other comments on this particular policy? Okay. If not, we have a motion on the table. I'd like to put it up for a vote. All those in favor of approving not C1, policy C1, please do so by indicating aye.
Aye.
Okay. Anyone opposed?
Yes.
Thank you. Anyone abstaining? So the ayes have it, the policy passes.
With one no,
With
nay,
one
which
no.
is Brian.
Yeah.
C15 is student conduct and discipline. Again, it was reviewed. I will have to say the policy committee was not met since the last time we met. And the overall responsibilities on this, the superintendent or his or her designee shall ensure the analysis of student discipline data to identify and address any disproportionalities in discipline. So it is, this whole policy and implementation is overseen by the superintendent, designate or her designee.
Can I have a motion to approve policy C15?
Some discussion?
So moved.
And may I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Discussion.
Yes.
Okay, Brian?
I would like to see the word disproportionalities struck from the policy.
Where are you looking?
So it's the
Student discipline.
very last page.
Okay. Okay, any other discussion?
I'm sorry, was that discussion or was that a motion?
You did make a motion.
Okay.
Is there any further discussion on that or anything else in the policy? Or, again, if someone wants to make it a motion to amend, at this stage, that's the way you change something and we vote on it. Suzanne?
I believe that the reason that word is in there is to make sure that we are following all statutes on any protected, Mayor Rule 2122.1 states each school shall maintain a safe, orderly, civil, flexible, positive learning environment which is free from hazing, harassment, bullying, and based on sound instructional. So it's to make sure that we aren't penalizing one protected category over another, and that's why the analysis is being done and looking for any different grading in how we're treating students. So that's why that word is in there, as far as I'm reading it and based on the statute.
Anyone else care to share any additional comments or questions, concerns? Mary Heather?
I'll just add this, I sort of recall when we went over this last time that somebody brought up the question of ensuring that there isn't significant deviation in discipline from school environment to school environment. So I think this particular segment of the policy kind of addresses that as well.
So, we have a motion on the table. So, what I'd like to do is ask all those in favor of approving policy C15, please respond by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? C15, the policy C15 passes.
D23, selection of instructional materials, is very similar to the library policy one that we did earlier last year. And this, instead of talking about library materials, this talks about selecting instructional materials. And I believe that there is either a procedure currently written or it's being developed. Keep it left, so we can't double check with her, but
Can I have a motion to approve policy D23?
So moved.
Oh, go ahead.
And
I'll second.
Okay, a second. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving policy D23, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed by saying nay? Any abstentions? Policy D23 passes.
F3, fire and emergency preparedness drills. This is mandated. We have to pass this. And it has been brought about because of what we've heard is some schools weren't doing drills and such. So it is now mandated, and I believe from what I've been reading over the summer, there's more pieces coming to support this as far as procedures and whatnot from the state level. So that is the fire emergency preparedness drills.
Thank you, Suzanne. Can I have a motion to approve policy F3?
So moved.
Okay, thank you, Tricia. A second?
Second.
Thank you, Steve. Any discussion? Seeing none? All those in favor of approving policy F3, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposing by saying nay? Any abstentions? The ayes have it and the motion passes.
F4, access control and visitor management, again, another mandated policy through the state. And basically, it's a way of keeping buildings and all of our students safe and ensuring that we know who's in the buildings and who are not in the buildings. Again, I believe this is also coming, will be followed up with some more procedures and suggestions from the state.
Thank you, Suzanne. Can I have a motion to approve policy F4?
So moved.
Thank you, Mary Heather. A second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Tricia. Any discussion? Seeing none? All those in favor of approving policy F4, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed by saying nay? Any abstentions? Okay, the ayes have it and the motion passes. Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne. Okay, item 2, we have an action to approve board norms and 8 characteristics of effective boards. In your board pack, there was a copy of the meeting norms as well as the 8 characteristics of effective boards. Let's start with the meeting norms. First, can I have a motion?
I'll move to approve the meeting minutes.
Thank you. A second?
I'll second.
Who was the second?
Brian.
Okay, great. Discussion.
Question?
Okay, I'm going to let Lindsay go first and then you.
Sure.
I see, so I guess it would be like an edit, but as far as like how to word the.
So why don't you describe what you see and then we'll
I'll say it right.
come up with the.
So there's something that I see as repetitive in 3. We will use humor as appropriate to help us work better. 4, we will use humor as appropriate to help us work better. 6, we will have fun together as appropriate for the betterment of the group. And of all the things I would like to see us edit this document so that it's in there one time in the best location.
So Brian's next,
Yes,
then I think Tricia, and then Joanna.
I can make a motion, but I don't know how to word it.
Yeah, we'll take the comments, discussion, and then I'll come back to
Okay,
you.
thank you.
I needed a translation. Number 4, under the norms, we will treat all meeting participants. I need an explanation of who is included in that.
That would be board members as well as community members, staff,
Okay.
anyone that's participating in the room.
So it's on.
Or on Zoom.
Good. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And we added that was your comment from the.
I just wasn't sure
Yeah,
whether
yeah.
that's what it was. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think Tricia, you were next.
Yeah, I was going to say, it just looks like that repetitiveness is for being duplicated. I
Yeah.
believe 3 is supposed to end after disagreements outside the board meeting. And then, so we would need to, I think Barbara's gonna have to walk us through this. We need a motion to amend.
Yes.
Okay, making a motion to amend the meeting norms, .3, striking everything after disagreements outside the board meeting.
Or the person that made the motion is more than willing to remove her motion and make it such that we adopt dropping the last 2 sentences of 3.
Either works. We can do, since we have the motion to amend, that's quick and easy. So you would like to make.
So I would like to make that motion.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay. So for item 3, the motion that we have in front of us is to eliminate, in item 3, everything outside the board meeting. We will operate in a respectful, collegial, and friendly atmosphere. We will use humor as appropriate to help us work better. Any discussion on that?
Just to clarify, keeping disagreements outside the board
Yes.
meeting.
Yeah,
And then after
absolutely,
that-
yes, absolutely.
Yes.
All those in favor of striking the last 2 sentences, is that
Yeah.
help?
Yes.
Of item 3, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so the amendment passes. So now the board norms has those 2 lines eliminated, so we can cross those out. Any further discussion? Okay, I'm going to go with Joanna.
I feel like number 6 is also redundant, so I would move that we strike number 6 because I think the respectful, collegial, and friendly atmosphere is for the betterment of the group. So I don't think we need.
Okay, so you're making a motion to amend our list of norms to strike item 6.
I'll second that.
Okay, discussion. Seeing none, we'll vote on the amendment. All those in favor of striking item 6 from our norms indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed by saying nay? Any abstentions? It passes. Amendment passes. Okay, so 6 is gone. Okay, now we're back to the original motion with the changes that we just approved, which eliminated 2 sentences in item 3, the last 2 sentences in item 3, as well as 6. Any further discussion? Lindsay?
I already said a comment once, so.
Okay.
This
Mary
is
Heather.
just a housekeeping matter.
Yes.
Do we need to make a motion to renumber those other ones?
No.
Okay.
So, I mean, unless someone insists that we do, we do.
Yes, okay.
All right,
I just want to make sure we're following.
we'll have Word do that automatically.
Thank you.
Okay, Lindsay.
This would be another motion, but just to discuss first, in current number 8, it ends with the word teachers, and I would like to see that norm be more inclusive of it's board members, district leaders, students, and teachers, and that leaves out all the rest of the employees of the district who aren't teachers or district leaders. And I would like to change that language somehow so that it's inclusive of all of the staff that were celebrating their accomplishments and milestones.
And so are you proposed, I'm going to try to help with.
Well, I would like to have some help with what's the best term word to do that.
Okay, Steve?
I have a suggestion. Instead of saying teachers, saying faculty and staff, because that includes everyone.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay.
Or you could just take out teachers and then strike the word leaders and put district employees. So board members, district employees, and students.
Okay, so we have two options.
Yeah.
So we need to make a motion to amend the language of item 8. So,
Or district staff.
so who would like to do that?
I thought Lindsay was making it.
Yeah.
Lindsay can, or?
So, well, what do you got, I don't know, that's why I wanted to have a discussion.
They gave you a
So
couple
either,
choices.
so what is it, either district staff or district faculty and
And
staff?
staff.
Yeah, faculty and staff or employees.
Employees, what's,
We're splitting hairs, you just need to.
right,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so making a motion to strike and teachers, editing the sentence to say district employees,
Employees and students.
faculties and staff, employees.
Employees covers
I
everyone.
lost it, I'm
District
sorry.
employees.
District employees,
Covers
students.
Everyone and students.
okay,
Period.
and students, period.
And do we keep district leaders in there, or is that?
Just district employees?
Right, so instead of leaders, it's district employees and students.
District employees, comma, and students, period.
Okay, excellent. Do we have a second? Okay, thank you, Joanna. Any discussion? Okay, so I'm going to state the motion. We would basically change item A to read, "We will celebrate accomplishments and milestones as appropriate for our board members, district employees, and students." Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. Okay, so now we have a list of norms that we've modified. Any further discussion before we vote on the norms as modified through the last 3 amendments, which is great. We're doing it. See none. All those in favor of approving the norms as modified by the 3 amendments, and please don't make me say those again, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. And we have norms. Thank you guys. Yay!
But they're a lot less fun and humorous than.
I know. Okay, moving on. The other suggestion.
I just have a quick question.
Yes.
I guess it would be housekeeping. Can we print and have
Yes,
these hung up
yes.
someplace?
Yes,
Okay.
I'll talk about what we'll do with these as soon as we pass, or, approve or not the next area.
We could put a rubber chicken on it or something to capture the humor, maybe?
Let's
No?
move on.
Okay,
We're getting
okay, just an
behind.
idea.
We're getting behind, I'm sorry. When we had our board retreat, our facilitator suggested that we also adopt the 8 characteristics of effective boards, and this is from the National School Board Association. Can I have a motion to adopt the norm? I'm sorry, the effective boards, 8 characteristics of effective boards.
So moved.
And a second.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Yes, would it be possible to have that document included? It's not here.
It's right under norms, keeps going. It's right under meeting norms.
It's basically the second page of the norms document.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it is there. It just got, it's the same file, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
My
I didn't scroll
bad.
down far enough.
Any other discussion? see none. Did I ask for a motion already?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, all those in favor of approving the 8 characteristics of effective boards, adopting them, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Awesome, they pass. So what I'm going to do with both these documents, including our vision and mission, is have it laminated, and then at every meeting, what we'll do is, Elaine suggested, this isn't my idea, and we'll put it on the table so that at least each table would have a copy so that it's in front of us as we go. So I'll make sure that happens before our next meeting. Thank you so much, appreciate it. Okay, next, moving on, committee updates. What I'd like to do is provide an opportunity for committees to spend a couple minutes giving an update if appropriate. If you don't have an update, that's just fine. What I'd like to do is start with communications and engagement.
Sure. Okay, so communications and engagement committees met a couple of times over the summer. I appreciate Tricia and Ellie's willingness to meet in a couple times in July. Basically, we worked with the updated website that Emily put together, or basically migrated all of our old stuff onto the new platform. And we have met once to go through and basically try to condense some of the language so that it's a little more user-friendly and accessible to folks who are just looking for information on the board website. So we will be meeting again on Wednesday, I believe, to continue that work, and then we'll pass that on to Emily to update at her convenience. One of the things that we will want to do is condense and make sort of standard our board bios. Some of our bios are short and sweet, and some of them are pretty lengthy, and we would prefer to have short and sweet. So I'm going to just do a suggested edit. I will share with each of you so that you can see what we're suggesting before we change anything. I think that'll just be easier to go from rather than asking y'all to edit, so we'll do it that way. And then other stuff that we are thinking about, this is actually something that Tricia brought up at our last meeting. You know, we've talked in the past about taking advantage of opportunities to have a board presence in places and times when our community is already gathering. So back to school is coming up soon. We have some open houses, kind of back to school nights. So one of the things we were thinking about proposing is making maybe a sign-up sheet or something to see if folks want to join, just sitting there at a table, you know, with your board hat on. And you had like a special, Tricia had like a suggestion, like literally having her board hat.
Yes. I was like, we need literal hats that say, this is my ACSD school board.
Right, just, you know, taking advantage of the opportunity that already exists and just having a presence. So we're going to send a little note out, maybe a sign-up sheet or something, see if folks want to fill that out. And then the only other thing is that we're anticipating putting out just a board update. We're trying to adhere to a quarterly schedule. We'll be calling it by season. I think that will be easier. So our fall one, I'm thinking probably end of September. Ideally, we will, as a board, have figured out what our timeline and process is for the superintendent search so that we can communicate that to our community. Obviously, welcome our new interim superintendent, and if we have like a work plan or something else, that would be important to communicate. So that's what we're working on right now. Any questions?
May I pass something on to you?
Yes.
At our board retreat for the Hanford Career Center, the facilitator had a pamphlet that their board used to talk about board roles that they distributed to the public. And she forwarded a copy to us. It really is a wonderful document that says, this is what the board does, this is what the board doesn't do, and it steps through that whole thing about, if you have a complaint about a teacher, take it to the teacher. So it's a great document, and I wasn't given a copy of that, but I know some people who have a copy of that. And I would like to pass that on to
Yeah.
you, so you guys can look at it and decide, but it's a great tool for community engagement.
And that potentially find its way to our website.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be great.
Yeah. Excellent. Suzanne?
So when I click on the ACSD webpage and the events calendar comes up, I noticed that the board meeting's not on there, but there's a Monk's ice cream social, and I know that Bridgeport's having an ice cream social.
Right.
So I'm just wondering, how do things get on here?
That's
And
an admin assist, so we're working with the admin assist to align some of the practices. So some of them are adding things to their own calendar, but it's an extra step to make sure they add it to the district calendar. So we're trying to align some of those practices.
And Emily, just a quick question. So, because on the board website, we have our board calendar with our board meetings. Is the district calendar also populated with board meetings?
no, I'm looking at it right now.
I think we
There's
decided,
nothing on there.
So I guess that's,
so we can also add, when we make the board meeting invites, we can add it to the.
Okay.
I think having it in
We-
both places would be good.
Yeah, yeah.
Probably
And
best
we're
for-
not doing, like, we
Definitely.
have had conversations about what we put on there and what we don't, so it
Yeah.
doesn't totally
Yeah.
overrun.
Totally,
But I
yeah.
think the monthly, whatever you decide for your monthly meetings.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, any other committee have an update that they would like to share?
I won't speak for Jason because he's away, but I think he's in the process of trying to line up appropriate meeting times at this point.
Okay.
and this is facilities.
For facilities, yeah.
Oh.
That's gorgeous. The sky is beautiful, guys.
I know, it's just.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's distracting.
Yeah, it's so, if you
Yes.
can't see it, stand up and look. It's really beautiful.
Steve?
For Finance Committee, Matt has released a structure for the timeline for budget development. I don't know if everyone on the board got that. The one that you sent us about the,
It was in
it was in,
Yeah, that was in Dr. Williams.
Oh, yes,
Oh, okay,
yes,
that
that's
was in
right,
there.
that's
I
right.
thought I saw
I'm
it
sorry, yes,
somewhere.
yeah,
So, yeah, if you look at that, yeah, it's coming.
good, excellent. Anything else, anything on negotiations or?
We weren't able to meet
Okay.
for us there.
Okay, great. Then, moving right along here. Discussion, and we're doing good, guys. Meeting schedule structure. So, the next agenda item is really a discussion-oriented agenda item. And Dr. Williams had provided us with some suggestions that we might want to consider. Also soliciting that others may have some additional ideas. So I'd like to open it up. I'm not going to repeat, what he put in his document, but I would like to ask folks what their thoughts are. One idea that I had is maybe we just go around the room and people can give their thoughts. And it's a more efficient way to handle this particular item. So Joanna, why don't we start with you?
I'm guessing the 8:30 a.m. for finance and the 8:30 a.m. for facilities, those were times that the committee had decided worked for them. So I'm guessing that those times were.
Yeah, that wasn't just something I just decided.
You just kind of pulled it out of the air.
Yeah. I'm not disappointed with the 8:30 time at all, but I think that was consistent with what I had done in the past on different days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I'm suggesting is Mondays, so that it's in our minds all the time, that meetings are on Mondays.
Yeah. I personally like model one.
Steve?
Yeah, I believe it's Model 1 as a committee. One board meeting, and the rest are committee meetings on Monday consistently. I think it's a great model.
Okay, great. Tricia?
I agree with model one, although communications and engagement times need to be tweaked. But big picture, model one.
I appreciate model one where the committee meets beforehand, and I'll throw out before COVID, where the board used to have all their committee meetings before the board meeting. we do committee meetings, have a small supper, it wasn't a gourmet meal. It was a sandwich and a salad or a bowl of soup and a spread or something. And then we moved into our meetings, so got that the easiest way to make it so that people aren't starving through the, and then we don't have fun because everybody's ugly because everybody.
Their stomachs growling. Thank you, Suzanne. Brian?
I would like Mondays because that way I can close it off in terms of work. And then also what I would like also is to have the board and the committee meeting also on the same day. They wouldn't have to be one right after the other. One might be in the morning and the other in the afternoon. But that would work the best for me.
So what you're indicating, just so I can clarify, would be that instead of doing it the first Monday, the second Monday, the third Monday, the fourth Monday, you would have the same day.
Yeah, and I think I would keep the second and fourth Monday.
Okay, so not necessarily eliminate all the other, so you'd use 2 Mondays and spread the meetings across those 2 days.
Right.
He prefers one, right? He
Well,
prefers
3.
Or 3.
I think that's actually closer to model
That's
2 that
model.
has full board member meeting on the second and fourth Monday of the month.
Is that what you were indicating?
And then
I
committee
didn't hear
meetings
that.
before.
I didn't hear that.
Basically, right now, we have second and fourth Monday.
Yep.
And what I'm suggesting that for me, keep the Monday, keep the second and fourth, but have the board and the committee meeting on those days together.
Right.
Yeah.
So are you,
Because he wants 2 full board meetings.
no, I didn't hear that.
Yeah.
So you're not saying that do you want 2 full board meetings?
If necessary, that would be the opportunity to have,
Okay, if necessary, but not mandatory.
not mandatory.
Right. So let me recap that again. So you would basically be a modified Model 2 where you would spread reserve, let me start over. So on the second Monday, we would have a full board meeting. We would also have 1 or more committee meetings. And on the fourth Monday, we would have an optional board meeting if needed, and the other committee meetings at various times during the day. Did I capture that?
That's good, thank you.
Okay. Hey, Mary Heather.
I'm undecided, partially because I think if we go to just a single full board meeting a month, it'll be a lengthy meeting. We can anticipate that it will need to be a lengthy meeting, which I think we need to accept that. And I'm in support of keeping everything on Monday. And I just would want to make sure that this isn't particularly challenging for folks who are on multiple committees, which is something that we'll need to think about, I guess. And I guess the only other caveat that I just would caution is, some committees, this frequency may not work for them, like negotiations, I imagine.
Negotiations
would
is
be a
not-
separate, yeah.
Right.
It's a separate thing.
Oh, it's not in there?
Yeah.
But even like, when the time comes for us to actually do work on facilities decision-making, I don't think one meeting a month is gonna work for them either. So I just want to be realistic about that. Obviously, they can set up special meetings, which is fine. So for our regular stuff, I guess 1 or 2 looks good, I would say. I think 3 just makes it really too hard for people who serve on local committees.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
Thank you. Lindsay?
I'm in favor of Model 2. I would rather have 2 full board meetings on my schedule and have them be, if we don't need the meeting, then we can take it off the schedule, or I'd rather not have a marathon, 4-hour plus meeting, because I'm always coming here after like a full work day. And I want to be fully present when I'm at the meeting. And if we didn't need them, then we'll take it off. But right now in my calendar, I have every second and fourth one set aside, and I'm not making other plans for that. It's easier for me to be like, oh yay, I have a night off, than try to create that time again. The one thing about the committee that I wanted to say though is communications and engagement has at times met twice a month, and your point about facilities, it's important that we allow the committees to make a schedule that works for them. I wouldn't want to have somebody say, ooh, I'd like to be on the finance committee, but I could never meet at 8:30 on the first Monday of the month. I think that the priority should be that the board members are able to say, this is my first, there's a time each year when we indicate our preferences, and that plays to our strengths. And so that there is flexibility, that however we move forward with this, we're not taking that flexibility away to say, sorry, communications and engagement, you can only meet once a month, and it can only be at 4:30. But I do like the spirit behind this and trying to make things more predictable, because that has been challenging with the superintendent search, and I love the predictability factor of this. So I appreciate that very much.
Okay. So I'm gonna, I'll wait and speak last. So I'm gonna let Ellie and then Jamie go next. Ellie, you can.
Yeah. So, I'm looking at this, and I like the idea of model number 1 a little bit, but I do worry about the board meetings running long, or us then having many months where we have to schedule a second one due to special things that come up. So, because of that, I'm going to lean towards model number 2, where we still have the time reserved for the 2 full board meetings a month. Maybe we could even name that the second one is if things don't get resolved in the first one or something like that. So that we always have that space reserved, because it is very hard for me as well to add in a meeting that isn't scheduled months in advance. The only change that I would propose maybe we think about is the Communications and Engagement Committee. Maybe we could meet before one of the full board meetings, instead of having it on the third Monday. So then we could just consolidate how many individual days I have to be, or we have to have a Monday evening set aside.
Thank you.
So to clarify, option number 2 with the Communications and Engagement meeting being directly before one of the board meetings instead of on a separate Monday.
Thank you, Ellie. And Jamie.
I would like to try number 1. I am sympathetic with all the critiques of long meetings, but I think we're going to end scheduling extra meetings, or we're going to have a lot of extra meetings anyway, with the superintendent search, probably, I assume, and so I'm interested in trying for a regular schedule to be long.
So, looking at this, what my thought was, I like the concept behind Model 1, but one thing that I would love to be able to see is having board time where we could actually have further education for the board, board development, have meetings where we could schedule board goals, meetings where we could take on the strategic plan for equity, where we're not having actions and other information that would be in that one board meeting. So the first board meeting of the month would be where we do all actions and business and approvals, and reserve the second board meeting to allow us to have time to cover things such as, training, board goal setting, work plan development, maybe special stakeholder input readouts or what have you, as opposed to trying to cram that kind of information into the first board meeting of the month and have that really be just oriented towards action of the board, right? And things that we need to take action in. So that was kind of my thought, is to be able to utilize that time because it's really hard to really schedule, and even thinking about what Emma and the team presented as an example of that would be a great time where we could spend quality time dialoguing and discussing what we need to do going forward as opposed to covering other things. And another example that we have is the timeline for the superintendent search. Really, I have a draft that's we're ready to kind of present, hopefully at the next meeting, but that would be a time that we, could cover something like that. It doesn't mean that, and maybe even some of the superintendent search stuff could fall on that time, but fortunately, I think, we're gonna have other meetings behind that, beyond that. So that's my thought. Jamie?
Thank you. Is the model you're describing, Barb, like descriptive of the discussion meeting format from that book that we?
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to say, I did vote for Model 1, and I'm fine with that. I do, if we did do a Model 2, I like what you're saying.
Thank you.
Or I appreciate the discussion meeting idea. I've always felt like there's not enough time to talk about stuff. And so if there was a format that it does allow for that, I would be, I would be amenable to that format as well. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. And obviously, it would be, it's not going to be a free-for-all. It's, specific things like training or, whatever, what the board would want is in my mind of, like goal setting and that kind of thing. That would be part of the work plan that we would identify. I think Suzanne, you were next.
I just offer that the SBA does numerous trainings, they're all online, and, take advantage of them. They're during lunch times, they're an hour,
Sure.
quarter.
Absolutely.
That would take time off of our schedule. I really have a hard time with scheduling meetings just for the sake of saying, we might do a training or something. I value people's time, and I want to make sure that we use it effectively and concisely, and if we have to keep the fourth Monday as a possible meeting for superintendent search or something, then I'll just leave it blocked on my calendar, but knowing that there's trainings offered during lunchtime, I'll take them. And I think that the presentation tonight belonged at tonight's meeting, because if you take it out of a board meeting and put it at a training meeting, you may not get public, because they might say, oh, it's just a retreat, they're just, whatever. But at tonight's meeting, if they wanted to come, they would have known that it was
And what I was thinking wouldn't be that it's like a retreat at all. It would be specific topics, and I gave training as an example that it, definitely like board goal setting, that kind of thing. So it would be warned with an agenda, just like any other board meeting, but it wouldn't have a financial, like the budget update and approval and normal things that we go through, policy approval, that kind of thing. It would be really dedicated to, and if there wasn't anything, we wouldn't have to schedule a meeting. That was just my thought. And I think Mary Heather.
So two things, I think, that just the reality of the work that the board needs to get done.
Yeah.
I think needs to factor into this, and perhaps, if we can be efficient with our meetings, and then maybe we can take the second meeting off our calendars. But given that we have this search coming up, I think we can anticipate needing to come together as a group, and it would be best and probably get the most attendance from folks if we had it on the calendar already. So I would advocate for having to for that reason. And I guess the only other question I have is where we are with respect to location. Are we planning to still circulate around our schools, or are we
That's-
having it here? I think that's
That's a
something we
good
need to
question.
figure out.
Yeah, that's a good question. Any further discussion? Lindsay?
Joan?
That's great.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in the two camp, but one thought I have is all of the school staff who come to our meetings, if there's a way to organize the division of agenda items so that the school staff only need to come to one meeting a month, then that would, I think that would be a nice way of trying to sort out, if there's a way to prioritize and sort that out, to sort of stack it. At the same time, we do get a lot of somewhat last minute or short notice things, and I think we need to have, the quality of our work shouldn't be impacted by our desire to spend less time in meetings. I think we need to have like high quality, timely work together. So like putting off the voting of the policies, we just sort of had to do that. But I wouldn't want to see us routinely putting things off just to stick to a schedule that we've imposed on ourselves. But yeah, so the 2 points in that are about, the school staff attendance and the, professionalism of our work.
Steve?
So before, like in the before times,
Yeah.
we had a model where we had committee meetings and then a full board meeting.
Right.
There are 5 committees, there's one superintendent, there's one business manager. So what would often happen was Dr. Burrows would be in one of those meetings for the whole time, and then the other committees would not see him until the board meeting. And the same thing with the finance director. So just a caution about having all of those meetings together. And the second caution is that some of us do serve on 2 committees.
Right.
That would be impossible to do with the second model. So.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Joanne?
Yeah, I think I'm remembering in the book, effective,
Governance.
the governance
core.
core book, the deep learning, and me wondering like, when does that happen? Like, when do we have deep learning? And so I think I've evolved a little bit, let's have that opportunity for some deep learning and then for work with this organization.
So, how would we like to proceed? I think, this was good discussion. Maybe we spend some more, my thought is maybe folks spend a little bit more time about this. Is this something we want to take up in the executive committee? Any thoughts? How we would make a decision? Mary
I
Heather?
mean, I guess I would just suggest asking folks to send you their preference in email so that you can tally that up and we can discuss this in exec committee.
Yeah, does that work for everyone? Okay, great. So,
Steve, I think Steve has his hand up.
okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would be mindful of the fact that we have several board members that are not here. They're not
That's
participating in the discussion. I would
Yeah, sure.
think they should have an opportunity to do that as well. So, but we don't want to vote on anything tonight.
Absolutely not. No, this is
Can't.
totally discussion.
Yeah, it's
Totally, yeah, I'm
It's
just
not
trying to
action.
get path forward, how we might want to resolve what we do here.
Well, and I think Mary Heather,
Go ahead.
Mary Heather brings up a good question, like the change in location is a big one.
Yeah.
I mean, even more than just going from 2 to 1, just not going to the schools anymore. And needing to fill that with something, or needing to have something else in place, that's not good.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for your thoughts. So definitely shoot me an email and we will be meeting, do you remember the date
I
ever?
think we're meeting on the 22nd. Oh, you mean the executive meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, the 22nd.
The 22nd. So if you can shoot me an email by then, that would be awesome, and I'll share it with the executive committee. And then what we can do is, just at the next board meeting, identify, well, this is the results that we got back. Okay. And
I have one.
you have,
It's about the
okay,
schools.
okay.
Mary Heather mentioned a great idea about having more of a presence in the schools, wearing our board hat. And I feel like that ties into our decision to whether or not we go to the schools. Because if part of the purpose of doing that is just to be present in the school, I would like to, once we see that schedule and we see, okay, how much can we be more present? I think that's an important piece of information to have as we make the decision about location, is can we accomplish that objective a different way?
Yeah, and that can be throughout the year, the school year, not just at the beginning of the school
Yeah.
year.
To be truly visit, not just sitting in the cafeteria of the school at a table, but if there's a way to really be at the school.
Shoring had a literacy night, and, I attended that, and folks were thrilled, that I took the time out. So those kinds of things matter. I definitely believe when schools have special events.
And I'm excited about this hat. Are we each gonna get one?
We need to move forward on it.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
I love the idea of a hat.
We have funds for.
I want Tricia to design it.
Okay,
yeah.
so I'm gonna move this forward. We don't have any additional public comment because there's no public. So the next item on the agenda is adjournment. Can I have a motion?
Move to adjourn.
A second? Okay, all those in favor, say aye. I think that motion, I could say passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone.